Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. We are going to kick off our August monthly Discovery Dialogue with a very exciting guest this month. And for those of you who don't know who we are, I'm Tay Lottie. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications here at the Capital Institute. I'm joining everyone from Santa Cruz, California. And the Capital Institute is a 501(c)(3) nonprofit organization. We're reimagining our economic and finance systems to promote the transformation to a more just and regenerative world. And as part of the Capital Institute's ongoing series, once a month we have John Fullerton hosting a live dialogue on a current and vital topic with relevance to economics and finance with global thought leaders. And we're really excited today to have Raj Sisodia here with us in particular. And before I jump into handing it off to John and introducing Raj, we have just a couple quick announcements about some things going on at the Capital Institute. So here in the next 2 weeks, we're kicking off our next cohort of the Introduction to Regenerative Economics flagship course that begins September 5th. I'll go ahead and drop a link in the chat. We also just launched a special giveaway for this course. So we just launched the Random Acts of Regeneration giveaway, which is an opportunity to win one of 5 full ride scholarships for this course. So I'm going to share a little bit more about how you can enter that giveaway. And for folks that don't win, if you don't get drawn, you also have the opportunity to receive a partial scholarship via the Generosity Fund and its mission to remove the financial barrier from this global regenerative awakening. So, without further ado, we're so honored to have Raj Sisodia here with us today. So many of you are familiar with his work. I'm not going to read his prolific bio, but I will say that I'm really looking forward to kicking off this conversation that, is arguably between two of the most visionary economic and business thinkers today. So I'll hand it over to you, John, to help kick us off.
Great. Thanks, Tay. And first of all, welcome, Raj. It's great to have you in our little community.
Thank you, John. Delighted and thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. I was with Raj at a meeting this summer and well, I guess it was this spring, and and sort of reflecting that we'd never had a chance to really have a real conversation. It was always in passing. And so we peeled off and had a lunch conversation together. And I just really enjoyed getting to know you on a more personal level, Raj. So first thing I did is invite you into our community on purely selfish reasons to share your wisdom. And as I wrote in one of my LinkedIn posts, your humility. And that's a rare thing these days. And maybe I would just start by asking you to share the anecdote you shared in the meeting about, I think it was when you wrote Conscious Capitalism and you shared it maybe before it was published with I don't know if it was your guru, but an elder that you respect, and what his reaction was.
Well, maybe you're referring to Firms of Endearment?
Was it? Yeah, I can't
Yeah,
remember
when
which
I
book it was.
shared. So when I wrote Firms of Endearment in 2007, that was kind of my entry into this whole world of consciousness and thinking about business differently. I had been a frustrated, unhappy, somewhat disgruntled marketing professor before that. I didn't really feel inspired by my profession. And I almost had a sense of shame about it. And I was always asking, there must be a better way. We can't be just selling a bunch of crap and spending $1 trillion, to get people hooked on junk. And are we making their lives better? And we're not actually. And so, we have a negative impact. And we're spending more on ads, coupons, and junk mail than the GDP of India, that year. So it was a little nuts. So anyway, I asked the question, is there a better way to think about business and marketing? And that ultimately, through a variety of detours, led to a book called Firms of Endearment, Companies That Are Loved by Everybody, which then led us to discover the principles of conscious capitalism. What makes a company beloved by everybody, not just customers, employees, community, suppliers, society at large? are these pillars, right? If you operate with purpose beyond profit, in addition to having to be profitable, if you take care of all of your stakeholders, not just think about your investors or customers, consciously seek to create value for everybody, and then have conscious leaders who are motivated by service to people and purpose, not just profit and power and money and ego. And then a culture where we look forward to going to work, there's a high level of trust and caring and authenticity. So anyway, I went to India for my 25th MBA reunion, and the book was coming out in February. I was there in December, so I had the pre-publication version, and I gave it to my mentor, who had been my mentor in my MBA days, Professor Manish Shrikant. And I said, Dr. Shrikant, I'd love to know what you think about this book because everything else I've done came from the head, but this also comes from the heart. And that was a big shift for me because all my business education was the head and the wallet, completely
Yeah.
bypassing the heart and the spirit in between. And the next morning, when I went to see him again, he said, Raj, normally I go to bed at 8 because I get up at 4 to meditate, but last night I was up till 11 reading your book. And I said, wow, that means a lot to me. He said, I'm enjoying it. I said, oh, thank you. He said, yeah, but as I read it, I realize it's nothing new. And I said, what do you mean? He said, everything you've written here was written 4,000 years ago. And I said, what management book came out 4,000 years ago? He said, no, it's all in the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the spiritual texts in India. And he said, all that wisdom that we think we're discovering for the first time has all been thought about deeply and written about. And we just
Mm,
have to apply it to our context today. So that was a big wake up for me to say we all run after the so-called latest knowledge, but there's wisdom that is timeless. There's
mm,
timely things and then there are timeless things. And I think we need to stay connected to those timeless things. And in many ways, our multi-poly crisis that we're living through is because we have lost touch with some of
yeah.
those timeless realities and truths. So that
Yeah.
was a big wake up for me to say I need to educate myself not only on the Indian spiritual wisdom, but also the Buddhist and the Judaic and all the traditions.
Mm.
There's so much that we have collectively as our as humanity that we can draw upon, from our collective wisdom. So,
I've had a very similar uh, I don't know what the right word is, sort of reminder, humiliation, because my work on this whole idea of a regenerative economy and regenerative enterprise, you could easily cynically say this is nothing new, and it isn't. This is indigenous wisdom, but it's also highly linked to Hindu wisdom and, in particular, Neo-Confucianism. I was stunned to learn how much Neo-Confucianism is aligned with the principles that I talk about. And then,
mm,
and even when Pope Francis wrote the encyclical Laudato Si,
mm,
he was drawing on Christian wisdom that
mm,
essentially is saying a lot of these same things. So it's a real reminder that we're actually just remembering what we've
yeah.
screwed up throughout the modern times. So,
And incidentally, I'm reading Pope Francis's autobiography right now. It's called
oh
Hope.
yeah, yeah,
And as you would expect, it's a beautiful book, so I do
yeah,
recommend it. Yeah.
I bet. Well, so it's interesting. You grew up in India, but the consciousness piece in you was not through the study of wisdom traditions. It came more intuitively. Is that a fair way to
Yeah,
describe
well,
it, or how did that come to you?
growing up in a formerly colonized nation is an interesting thing because I was in India until I was 7, and then we lived abroad for 5 years, and we went back to India when I was 12. So most of the education, at least in those days, the English language schools were run by missionaries.
Mm,
Right? So they were Catholic, typically Jesuits and so forth. And
mm,
so schools was I went to St. Joseph and St. Paul and St. Aloysius and Christ Church,
mm,
those kinds of schools. And so you get kind of a watered down version of Christianity there, although they're not allowed to really teach it fully, but it's in there. But that didn't really take in any way. I just felt some guilt and shame about things. Uh, they don't present the beautiful wisdom of it. They just kind of give you
right.
the harsh
Just the
truth.
rules. Yeah.
Yeah, and then at home, again, India has this caste system, right? So if you're not born into the Brahmins, the priestly class, and you don't get the spiritual grounding at home.
Hmm.
So I was born into the warrior caste, and so For us, all the spiritual stuff was outsourced to the Brahmins. So the priests would come and they would do all the ceremonies in Sanskrit, which none of us understood, and just
Hmm.
tell us to say this and do that, And I would ask why, what does it mean? And nobody would explain it to me. So nobody in my family had any spiritual grounding. They followed the rituals, right?
Hmm.
You wear this and you don't eat that, and on these different days and whatever. But nobody could explain the wisdom. So I grew up with no understanding and no respect for it.
Hmm.
So I got nothing. I got nothing at school, nothing at home. And so ultimately,
And then you became a marketing professor.
I know. So, as an idealistic kid, I mean, I entered the most cynical profession there is. Like,
Where did the consciousness come from, do you think?
I think there was a hunger latent inside me. And I remember when I was writing Forms of Endearment a couple of years, yeah, 2 years before it was published. I was in India and I was bored one day at my parents' home. And my sister said, Here, read this book. You might enjoy it. It was called The Guru of Love. And it was about one of the spiritual teachers in India, Sri Ravi Shankar, who started this global art of living movement, which is now in 175 countries, and it's huge. And so I just read that book and I said, wow, that sounds pretty interesting. It touched some chord in me. And so it so happened there was a course starting in Boston like 2 days after I returned, the following week. So her son signed me up for that, and that course was simple, but five basic principles rooted in ancient wisdom, not overtly religious in any way. But it was profoundly moving for me and insightful. And I said, oh my God, I was suddenly on this spiritual high. I said, wow, I never thought of life this way, or. And
Hmm.
so I immediately took an advanced course, the following week with 3 days of silence in it, with actually Sri Ravi Shankar himself in
Hmm.
Atlantic City, of all places. And so that was kind of the beginning of my exploration
And when was that?
some of these things.
When was
And
that roughly?
this was about 2005. And
Okay.
then 2007, when the book came out, and my professor said what he said about the Gita, so then I started to not only take these courses, but read the Gita, and then the Vedanta, which literally means the end of knowledge, like the culmination of knowledge. Started to read a little bit of that. I wouldn't say I'm deeply versed. I'm kind of a dilettante in that sense, but I really gained new respect in some ways for my own heritage. I said, wow, there's answers are
Mm.
sitting back at home. We're running all over the world
Right.
seeking answers. And many of them, in my case, were sitting in that wisdom tradition, not only for spiritual things, but also now for health. Like I go
Hmm.
to an Ayurveda 3-week retreat every December now in the south of
Mm.
India, in Kerala. And
Mm.
Ayurveda is the ancient medical system from India,
Mm.
which is really about holistic well-being and prevention of disease. And so yeah, that's a it has been a transformational experience for me in the last. I've done it 3 times. I'm
Thing
doing it once again.
we were having I actually refer to it for me as a dark night of the soul, which was right in that period after I left
Mhm.
Wall Street and for probably 6 or 7 years, trying to figure out sort of post 9/11, post my Wall Street. So we
Yeah,
were we
yeah.
were we were suffering in the wilderness together, even though we didn't know it at the time. Uh,
Yeah, and we were probably in our early 40s. I think
yeah,
that's when the midlife crisis is a real thing, and it's 38 to
yeah,
42 when it starts, and that's kind of the
yeah,
dissatisfaction with the status quo, the hollowness and emptiness of it all, and it's like, wow, is this all life
yeah,
is about? And then
yeah,
the search for something more resonant.
yeah.
That's literally happened to me as well. I mean, I was on a track. I was a professor of marketing and information technology, and one day I realized I don't care about either of those two things. And I said, my God, so I need to think about, and I was in a position at the university, highly visible endowed professorship in that area, and I did not get renewed, and that was a crisis, but that was the biggest gift for me because it
Mm.
forced me now to ask, what do I really care about?
Yeah,
What do I devote my energies to, and do something that is meaningful to me, and actually includes my heart and my spirit. I have to be
yeah,
moved and I have to be inspired by anything I do.
right.
If those two things are missing, then it's pretty mundane. So
Yeah,
that was the path that ultimately led me. So that was kind of the crisis, dark night of the soul,
mm,
triggering the hero's journey,
right, right.
right? And then the cave you fear to enter see holds the treasure you seek. All of those
Yeah, it's
things.
crazy, right? It's
Yeah,
actually real.
that journey,
Yeah.
works. It really does work. Yeah.
So on this issue of consciousness, I mean, I've actually I had and this isn't about me, but I did have a spiritual awakening, but my work didn't come through that spiritual lens. It came much more through the kind of scientific, exponential growth on a finite planet, limits to growth. Oh my gosh, the whole thing doesn't work. Very, very rational realization as opposed to a spiritual tug. Although I think it was the spiritual tug that probably pulled me away from Wall Street. But I'm actually just in the last couple of years learning a lot more about the science of consciousness
Mm,
and where it sits. In fact, I had this idea that it kind of went physics, chemistry, biology, ecology, and then consciousness
mm,
on top. And now I've come to learn that it's actually consciousness at the foundation layer.
mm.
I guess my first question is that how you think of consciousness? Or how do you think about what is consciousness before we apply it to business?
Yeah. Well, I haven't tried to think of it in terms of that kind of hierarchy. To me, consciousness simply means seeing a bigger reality, right? Seeing the whole picture. I mean, we can never see the whole picture, but
Mm,
I like the way Sadhguru expresses it. Sadhguru is another Indian spiritual teacher now that I'm deeply inspired by. And so it's imagine you're sitting in a room, it's totally dark. You can't see anything, right? So you're not conscious of anything that's there. But if you light a match now, you become conscious of a little space around you, right? And if you have a flashlight, you can become conscious of things that are further away. If you turn on all the lights, now you see the whole thing, right? And how things are connected, interdependent. You start to understand the greater reality that we're a part of. And there's no end to that, right? Because you can keep expanding that field of vision. So having a deeper understanding of reality as it is, and then understanding the consequences of your actions, right?
mhm,
On yourself, on others, immediately and into the future, and then having a sense of responsibility for those outcomes or the consequences of your actions, right? Um, and having a finer sense of right and wrong, and
What
ultimately,
causes consciousness to lead you to which I agree with, but it's so missing today, this acceptance that you have responsibility for your actions? Because it seems to me,
mm,
just connecting this to our capitalist system, there's so much behavior that essentially either consciously either consciously or unconsciously rejects the notion that we're responsible for our actions.
yeah. Well, we've kind of been given license to do that through some of the theories that we have embraced, right? So Homo economicus, the whole economic paradigm, the idea of externalities. It's a very convenient word to say, yeah, you don't need to deal with the consequences of your actions, right?
Right.
And that kind of becomes a blanket permission. We kind of go through and we've kind of created an ethos in which says your job is to be as selfish as possible, and that's how our system
Psychopath.
works. What's that?
Be a psychopath.
Yeah, in a way, and it's interesting. You know, David Sloan Wilson and I, we taught a doctoral seminar last semester at our university called From Friedman to Darwin,
Yeah.
Rethink the Theoretical Foundations of Business and Economics. And one of the things that we talked about in that is that social science theories are very dangerous because the wrong theory can create so much harm. They become self-fulfilling.
Hmm.
Right? So you can't have a theory in physics that becomes true just because you said it. It has to apply, it has to work. But in social sciences, we tell people this is how human nature is and this is how we behave, right, etc. And we learn that, and then we start behaving like that, and it becomes self-fulfilling, right? Whether it's Michael Porter's theory of competition, or whether it's agency
Yeah.
theory that you have to bribe people to get them to do the right thing, or whether it's Homo economicus, all of that. So those all become self-fulfilling, and we start acting like we create the world that reflects that reality. So
Yeah.
there's nothing as dangerous as a bad theory, and nothing as powerful as a good theory, which is a right theory, which
Mm,
is rooted in a deeper understanding of human beings.
mm,
What does it mean to be a Homo sapien? What defines us? What has enabled us to not only flourish but have the impact that we've had in the world?
mm,
And we don't tap into our altruistic nature, our loving
mm,
qualities, our ability to cooperate, or the fact that we're very purpose driven. and we are self-aware. All of those things have to be brought into everything that we do.
Mm,
But we have created this weird world, and I think you refer to it somewhere as a trauma response. That whole traditional economics, is almost like a trauma response. It's not a well-grounded response. But that if we were to bring that in, a deeper understanding of what it means to be human into
mm,
everything that we do, so that everything we do becomes an expression of our love.
mm,
Right? So much in our life, in business especially, comes from fear and greed.
mhm.
And business decisions are rooted in
Which is
fear
low
and greed.
consciousness energy. So they're
Yeah,
back to,
yeah.
yeah.
And can we make all those decisions based on love? And
Mm.
can everything be an expression of our purpose into the world, a loving purpose, right? And so I think all of those elements are what we need in order to get out of the mess that we've created with that old way of thinking.
I just circle back to your comment about theory. I suppose I have a chip on my shoulder because I'm so committed to developing a new theoretical framework when the world's on fire and everyone wants action, action, action.
Yeah,
And I keep remaining steadfast in believing that I always draw on Einstein's quote, or at least it's attributed to him, where he said, theory determines what we're able to see,
yeah.
which is to me, we all know that seeing is believing. So entrepreneurs build things and show that it's possible, and that's all great. But the opposite is also true, which is that our theories limit what we're able to even see, and they change the way we see
Hmm.
what we see. So one person will look at the internet and see one thing, and I look at the internet and see something
Yeah.
profoundly different. So, well, let's switch gears for a second, or just so we don't run out of time. You were just about to lead into the root cause of all the problems we see in the world, and when you and I guess John Mackey, maybe tell the story of how you and John Mackey got together to form the organization Conscious Capitalism, and I'll share with you, I was a little skeptical, and I actually read something that you were initially a little skeptical, I've been involved in some businesses that try to sell their stuff in Whole Foods. And I've had two very different experiences. One was, remarkably positive, where the people at Whole Foods, and this is pre-Amazon, by the way, the
Mhm.
people at Whole Foods, I would say, went out of their way to be helpful to a small startup. But then I've also seen once stuff starts selling, there's a 365 brand in its place, and it feels pretty extractive. And I'm being polite because it makes companies go bankrupt. So I'm just curious, and maybe it's why I haven't like leapt to the conscious capitalism conferences and whatnot. I think I've had a little bit of, I don't know, skepticism, and there's a very famous hedge fund manager who preaches how he meditates at lunch and then goes right back to basically a single-minded focus thing, and calls it conscious. And so help me with my skepticism. And this is by
Mm.
no means directed at you personally, but of the idea that business can be conscious.
Mm. Well, you also asked how I met John. I don't know if you want me to go there or go into
Yeah,
your
yeah.
second. Uh, so, so I had written Firms of India, and Whole Foods was one of the 28 companies that I had featured in that book. I had not met John or interviewed him. He actually did not give interviews to authors in those days. So I relied on secondary sources. But once the book did come out, actually my co-author was on a flight and sitting next to somebody and told her about the book. And she said, "Oh," I said, "Don Mackey would love it. Can you send me the book?" He said, "No, it's just a Word document right now. It's not done. Send it to me anyway." So he emailed her a 300-page Word document, and she sent that to John, and he actually read the Word document. He reached out to us and said, "This is really resonates strongly with me. I read all the business books. This is the one that I really agree with everything you're writing, and I'd love to meet." And so I went down to Austin and spent a whole day with him and got a tour of the store and then talked about work and business and leadership and philosophy. And then at dinner, I shared my mind map, which I had created called the Institute for New Capitalism, or INC. And I said, John, I want to devote the rest of my life to this story of business, which I was never taught in business school, right? The business can be built upon love and care and purpose and, with the stakeholder mindset. And that these companies actually outperform the market.
Mm,
It's not a trade-off to say you
mm,
have to pick either profits or purpose, that this is this is the pathway to real profits. I think what a lot of companies generate are false profits
mm,
because they've got this bottom line, but meanwhile they've burned out their employees and they've damaged the health of their customers and they've destroyed their local community and they've hurt the environment, etc. And that's not a business. That's a parasite. You've sucked value out of
mhm.
other entities, right? And so anyway, he looked at that mind map and he said, "That's my vision as well." But I like the phrase conscious capitalism, which had been coined by Muhammad Yunus.
Oh,
The
really? I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
so he used that first in 1997, referring to a social business like the Grameen Bank, whose
Hmm.
only purpose was to uplift people out of poverty, especially mostly women, right?
Hmm.
All the surplus gets reinvested back into that purpose. But
Hmm.
we were using it in a broader way to say we need to apply consciousness to capitalism, and therefore, and then all the other things that follow from that. So anyway, that's how we met in 2000, October 2007, and then we had a retreat at his ranch in February of 2008. And that October 2008, while the financial crisis was raging, it's all a coincidence. It didn't, our the birth of our movement had nothing to do with the financial crisis. It just sort of happened to coincide. We had our
Yeah.
first conference in Austin,
I
and
don't think that was a coincidence.
yeah, I suppose there was something in the air,
Yeah.
but
I was at a roundtable in San Francisco, hosted by oh, I'm blanking on his name. Uh anyway, the theme of the roundtable was, "Is capitalism soon over?" Question
mm,
mark.
mm,
And Lehman Brothers collapsed in the middle of the
ah,
session.
okay,
So,
yeah, yeah. So
uh,
that's how we started. Now, on your other question about Whole Foods, I mean, I never worked for Whole Foods, so I can't answer to those kinds of things. A conscious business is still a business, and sometimes they have to make hard decisions about how to survive and stay in business, right? And Whole Foods always the problem for them has been the high costs, right, of organic and natural, and the lack of economies of scale there, and the lack of government subsidies as well in many cases, right?
yeah,
So their price points have always been higher, and therefore they've always struggled for mechanisms to figure out how to be more affordable. I think
yeah.
Amazon has helped them in that regard, but
Mm.
uh, but so I think
You
those some
wrote,
of
I
the
remember, somewhere you wrote that conscious companies should be the acquirers, not the acquiree. I think I
did I
read that.
write that? I don't remember writing
I think
that.
so, yeah. It was
Okay.
all, it was all, it was
Yeah.
a, it was old. It was not a
Hmm.
recent thing.
Well, I
Um,
might agree. I might agree with myself then. But
but that's not always possible. I mean, obviously,
it's not. I mean, Whole Foods got acquired because they had to, because they got attacked by activist investors. Precisely for that reason, they were not
that's
competitive
right. Yeah, I
for a
forgot the
while.
piece. Yeah, yeah,
Their stock price was down 40% over about an
yeah, yeah,
18-month period. And they were trying to revamp their business strategy and figure out how to compete because now, like I was with John when Walmart made a big announcement that they were getting into natural and organic groceries.
yeah,
I said, John, how do you feel about that? He said, well, it's good news and bad news. I said, what do you
yeah.
mean? He said, well, it's bad news in the sense that Walmart is a tough competitor and they'll put a lot of downward pressure on price for us. And
Mm,
it'll be hard to compete with them. But on the other hand, it's great news. I said, what do
yeah,
you mean? He said, our purpose is to have more people have awareness and access to
yeah,
healthier foods, right? And
yeah,
Walmart is going to help us fulfill our purpose. So at that
yeah,
level, we're fellow travelers, right? So I think
yeah,
that's the reality that they were facing, and they got attacked by activist investors who basically took a 9.5% stake, which is all you need in order to issue proxies, and then you can get other shareholders to buy into your proposals. And they basically came to him with a list of almost like a ransom note, right? You have to fire
yeah,
the majority of your board members, and you have to announce a 30% layoff, and you have to publicly say that you're willing to explore a merger with Publix or Kroger or Albertsons, one of the big three. And so and you have to do all this by Monday. They came on a Wednesday, and you have to do all this by Monday or else. And he said, what do you mean or else? I said, you'll see. So it was kind of literally like a threat. And John gave an interview to the Texas Monthly magazine that afternoon. He said, these guys are greedy bastards. Jana Partners, the activist investors, the owner of that just bought the most expensive home in America, $175 million house on Long Island. So he doesn't care about our business. He doesn't care about our purpose. So he doesn't care about our people. All he wants to do is to flip the stock and and make
Hmm.
money. He said, Whole
Welcome to
Foods
my
is,
world.
yeah. He said, Whole Foods is my baby and they're trying to kill my baby. And
Yeah,
you're going to have to kill me first. So these were fighting words, on a Wednesday afternoon. But the reality is that they kind of had him cornered. And so that Friday, I think they had to fly. They flew to Seattle and all night meeting with Jeff, and by Sunday morning they had an agreement because that was the least in their mind, the lesser of two evils. They would have liked to remain an independent company, but they were really under threat of disappearing, becoming a
yeah,
part of Albertsons or whatever, right? So the whole purpose would be
yeah,
gone. As it is, Amazon allowed them to keep their culture, keep their values, keep their purpose, keep their headquarters, and said, we'll just help you. We'll try to figure out how to help you. So overall, John would say it was 95% positive.
would
But anyway,
it?
so I
Yeah,
think some of those other things that you talked about, the 365 brand, etc. I mean, those are ways to try to create more affordability. I think Whole Foods still has
yeah,
100,000 suppliers. So, but maybe some of
yeah,
those suppliers are making those 365
yeah.
products.
And to his credit, I ran into one of the Whole Foods board members at a conference, and I kind of asked him, what's the real story, and he told me that the board was trying to give John more stock options, and he refused them, which I
Yeah.
thought spoke, a lot about where he's.
Well, yeah. So that goes
Coming from.
back to 2006, actually.
Yeah.
In 2006, John wrote a letter to his, at that time, 60,000 uh, team members, as they call them. And the letter went, I have it on my phone, computer somewhere, the letter, but it said, Dear team members, when we started Whole Foods in 1978, I had no idea it would become such a large and successful company. And as a result, I have more money today than I ever expected to have, and I have more than enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life and do whatever I want to do. So I've asked the board as of January 1, 2007 to permanently lower my salary to $1 a year. And all the stock options that I get every year as CEO, I've asked that they be donated to the Whole Planet Foundation. Because the reason I come to work in the morning is not for the paycheck, but because I passionately believe in the purpose for which our company exists. And then he signed the
Mm,
letter, much love, John, right? And so that was before the financial crisis. Now, Whole Foods, all of his wealth was tied up in Whole Foods stock, right? And Whole Foods
mm,
was at 70. And by the time the financial crisis came, it was $6.
mm,
Okay, and I was standing with him in Austin, and the world was collapsing around us. And his stock was at 6, and he seemed pretty calm. I said, John, why are you here and why aren't you freaking out? He said, I think the market is overreacting. Our sales are down a little bit, a few
mm,
digits, but it'll come back, you know.
mm,
And I know our institutional investors are with us. We've talked to T. Rowe Price and others. They understand our purpose and what we're trying to do and so forth. So nobody's jumping ship. In those days, we didn't have the activist investors to worry about as much.
mm.
And sure enough, within 2 years, the stock was at 120. So,
Wow.
but even
Okay.
in that moment, he didn't say, I better start taking my salary again because my wealth has
Yeah.
appreciated
Yeah.
by 90%, right? But, that's so yeah, John is
That's
this
special. Yeah.
human, but yeah, he's got a lot of, deep, deep commitments to many of these things.
Yeah. And now we have the richest man in the world demanding a pay package from his board of 25, $30
Yeah,
billion on top of being the
yes.
richest man in the world.
You
So
know, there's
you're,
no amount of money that can fill the hole inside you if there's a hole. That's what you're trying to
but
do.
but since you started on this work and the conscious capitalism movement, it's extraordinary in its reach, and its ambition. And it predated, a lot of us thinking about the future of capitalism, the uh, I don't want to, the whole ESG phenomenon, the B Corp phenomenon, stakeholder capitalism has become popular, but you guys were already creating that movement before it became a movement, and so you've seen, I mean, I like to, in the impact investment space, I like to tell people that I made an impact investment when I was still at Morgan in 1997 and had the exact same conversation about doing well by doing good and philanthropy versus investment that were happening today. And so you must have a similar sort of cynicism about how the exact same conversation is happening now. And now there's this blowback against it all. So I'm just curious how you're processing call it the current zeitgeist around
Yeah.
of your work.
Yeah, I try to zoom out and take a bigger, not to get mired in the muck of it, and try
Mm,
to see the bigger picture here and to understand the broader currents and the ways in which things unfold. So paradigms do not change readily, and there's always a resurgence of the existing paradigm that tries to reassert itself. I jokingly refer to it as Star Wars as kind of the first three episodes. The first one was A New Beginning or A Force Awakens, right? The awakening of consciousness was a big phenomenon in our world, I would say, roughly starting in 1989, 1990. It was a big turning point. 1989 was like one of the most significant years in human history. It was the collapse of the Berlin Wall, right? The
mm,
bringing down of the Berlin Wall, not the collapse. It didn't just fall down. People brought it down. It was the end of the
mhm,
defining debate between freedom and communism, and freedom won, right? And you had a whole series of domino effects coming out of that, and more democracies being born. It was the year that the World Wide Web was invented,
mm,
1989. It was the year that the Exxon Valdez oil spill happened, the reawakening of environmental consciousness after Silent Spring and Rachel Carson
mm, mm,
decades earlier. It was also, interestingly, the year when the median age of adults crossed 40 for the first time in the US. And
mm,
40 is midlife. And what it said is that, people start thinking about meaning and purpose at midlife in our generations. Now with the younger kids, it's more like a quarter life crisis. But for us, it was a midlife crisis, right? Where you start to feel hollow and empty. And then, so the majority of the adult population in the US was now at the age where meaning and purpose was more resonant for them, right?
mm,
And the fourth one was that we had more women college graduates cumulatively.
mm,
Women outnumbered men as college graduates starting in 1989. Every year, I mean, there's a 60% of college grads are women now, right?
mm,
So that,
mm,
that ratio is skewing even further. But when many things happened, right? And the world really did dramatically change. And within years, you had the end of apartheid, and then you had the rise of, gay
mm,
rights, and you had many other things. So that was the awakening of consciousness in many dimensions, whether it's women, whether it's, minorities, all kinds of things, right? What happens inevitably when you have a lot of change in a short amount of time is that there's a backlash from the
mhm.
established order that starts to feel threatened. So I liken that to episode two, which is The Empire Strikes Back. That's what we're in the middle of right now, and it could be predicted, because when you're just a small movement, not having a big impact, nobody cares. But when you
Mm,
actually start to change the conversation, then people want to kill it, right? They want to kill that baby in the crib. And so I think that's what we're going through right now. There's a irrational, I think any idea can be taken too far, and I am certain sure that some of these ideas that we talk about can be taken, beyond their domain of applicability. There was a
mm,
professor at Harvard Business School named Theodore Levitt who wrote some very classic articles about marketing and other things. But one thing he wrote, because one of his ideas got taken too far about globalization, he said an idea is not responsible for the people who believe in it. Okay. You can have
That's
an idea and
beautiful.
somebody can take it and run and make a cult out of it.
Yeah.
Right? Um, oops, hold
We
on.
just lost your live. There we go.
Sorry, not sure what happened there. And so I think, yeah, so maybe there are areas in which people were applying these things too far and taking it too far. But yeah, fundamentally, I think the core ideas of those changes are important. So I think we have to stay true to that. And this too will pass, but we have to stay. It's not going to pass automatically. It's a time that calls for moral courage
Mm,
and moral clarity, and we have to stand up and continue to fight for what we believe in, right? The peaceful warrior. This is a time to fight for what is right. And so that episode three is the return of the Jedi, right? We have to stay in training and stay ready for that. So
yeah.
that's how I'm thinking about the current time, because progress never happens like this. It happens
Mm,
like this and then it goes back and then it goes like this. So there's kind of a looping back and then you start the next trajectory and so forth. So the thing is, we don't have the luxury of time, as you well know in your work, right? This is the decade of consequences and the decade of determination.
mm,
Consequences of all the things we've done in the last century to create the level of prosperity we do enjoy.
mm,
But at what cost? We're seeing the consequences of that right now, whether it's climate change, whether it's species extinction, whether
mm,
it's all of the physical, mental, emotional, social, spiritual breakdown that we're experiencing as a species. And this is the decade of determination. If you don't act now, we cross some thresholds
mm,
which we cannot reverse, right? So there is a sense of urgency to all of
mm.
it.
So I share your I hadn't heard anyone or thought about it as the Jedi, the Star Wars. That's a good analogy, and of course, um, James Cameron somehow intuit a lot of things way ahead of time, so it's worthy of paying attention. But one thing I'm really interested in is, so I would, if I were to, and I think what you've shared today would reinforce this. I think it'd be accurate to describe your work as bringing consciousness to the system as it exists to improve the system through a higher level of consciousness. Uh,
Yeah.
and and that's a theory of change that is that's different than mine. I would say that I've maybe it's because I come out of finance, which is so system. If you're a marketing guy, you're thinking about a company, and if you're a
Mhm.
finance guy, you're like the system is the thing, because the products are just sort of made up, but you're really participating in a system at the core of what you're doing. And so maybe that's why the doorway I've come through is the system doorway, and the doorway you've gone through is the corporate enterprise doorway.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
in our course, we talk about. I have a colleague, Sandy Wiggins, and he does kind of a consciousness raising series of exercises, partially through breath work in our economics course, believe it or not. And he frames it as the I, the we, and the it.
Yeah.
And so, the we is the organization, and the
Mhm.
it is the system.
Right.
And and so I'm completely embrace the idea that you kind of have to work at all three levels at the same
Mhm.
time.
Mhm.
But if I had to sort of say where am I focused, it would be on the system level, because I think the system design, in the same way you described the organization design, is flawed based on our wrong economic thinking. The economists also designed the whole system, built on a Newtonian machine clockwork universe framework, just based on
Mhm.
an assumption. And yet I do think that the common thread that runs through all of it is higher consciousness. And I would say that it was the level of consciousness that has given rise to the system we have, which
Mhm.
is responsible for exactly the problems we have,
Mhm.
both inside corporations and the effects of the economy, not just corporations, but the whole economy outside. And so I guess this isn't very coherent, but I'm curious how you think about the difference between a company and an organization and the system within which it exists. And if we are to get through this, what it feels increasingly like a portal and a metamorphosis into something that none of us knows what it's going to be yet. It's more than a rising of consciousness inside a pre-existing system. It's going to be a bigger shift than that, which is why I feel the blowback is so violent, is that people somehow know is what's coming is really big and therefore scary. But I'm
Mhm.
just really curious how you think about the system piece of this.
Yeah, so I agree with you that we are focused on the I and the we, increasingly on the I, because we're talking about elevating the consciousness of leaders, awakening
Yeah,
leaders, and
leadership. Yeah, yeah,
everything else follows from that, you know. So most of my work and my recent books are all in that realm.
yeah,
And our movement was born out of practice, right? It was born out of a set of companies coming together and finding each other, each of them thinking I'm the weird one and I'm alone. Right? John said, I thought I was the only one like this. You've got 28 of them in the book here. And so those were many
yeah.
of the people at our conferences, right? And so the movement kind of arose out of that and then say, let's have more, let's try to spread that to more and more companies, right? Over time. And we do recognize that ultimately it also does require change at the system level. We as a movement have, for perhaps some more practical reasons, stayed away from that largely. You know, we've said, okay, there are policy things that we could talk about. And we had the labor secretary under Obama, Thomas Perez, speak at our conference, for example. We had two meetings at the White House during the Obama years. So there was some effort at that time to say what are the policy things from a taxation, from incentives, et cetera, that could in fact encourage this shift. But then ultimately, we ran into the inevitable push and pull of political viewpoints, right? And people said, well, conscious capitalism appeals across the spectrum.
Mm,
It doesn't have to be a left or right thing. So let's just stay out of that,
mm,
conversation to the life, which I was a little frustrated, but I can see that. So we've chosen to focus on, but knowing full well that we need to do that, and there are other people who are, like
yeah,
yourself and others, are working at that level as well. Ultimately, as you said, we need the push and the pull. We need all of
yeah.
those things working together. So, but if I zoom out again and think about why did we get into this mess and create that kind of system, and if you go back to Adam Smith and believe that that's kind of the founding, philosophy. He's like the founding father in a way of modern capitalism, right? And
Mm,
the power of the market. I think what we did was we based everything on the theory on the wealth of nations, but he also wrote, as we know, the theory of moral sentiments, the human need
mm,
to care, right?
mm,
17 years before he wrote the Wealth of Nations, which he considered to be his masterwork ultimately,
mhm, mhm,
and the Wealth of Nations was the second. And what we've done is we've simply adopted the wealth of nations and we forgot about the need to care.
mm,
Right. So the way I say it is that capitalism had a mother and a father, and they were
mm,
both Adam Smith.
mm,
The father energy was in Wealth of Nations about
mm,
achievement and striving and all of that.
mm.
And the mother energy of caring and compassion and all of that was in
Yeah.
moral sentiments. And we did what we do in life. We chase after our father's dreams and we take our mothers for granted. And I think all the mess that we've created in the world is because we have not been sufficiently grounded in mother energy.
Mm,
That's compassion,
amen.
caring, empathy, all of those things, right? And we have made it. What happens? Healthy masculine energy in the absence of the feminine becomes unhealthy,
Mm,
right? So, focus and structure and determination and all of those things become hyper competition and domination and aggression, and everything becomes a damn war in
mm,
the absence of the feminine, the countervailing, balance of that. And so
mm,
I think a big part of my work also has been that. I wrote a book called Shakti Leadership, which is about integrating masculine and feminine. It's not
mm.
about replacing masculine with feminine. It's about saying we need
Yeah.
both. All of us come with both of those. We come from a mother and a father, and we have
Mm.
systematically suppressed that feminine energy in
Which is
society, within
a
ourselves.
great example of the commonality of our two works, because in the way I would say that same message, the way I would say it is that in living systems, there are multiple things that are in balance in order for that system to be healthy, including, literally the masculine and feminine need to be in balance for regeneration to be possible in at least many species.
Mhm.
Um, but the masculine energy and feminine energy being in balance is as old as, Sanskrit. And yet there's nothing, and here's where I would challenge your comment about Adam Smith. I see him as he had a philosophical and moral grounding that just as you described, but he was also a product of Newton and a mechanistic way of seeing the world. And the invisible hand was born out of a all-knowing God that had compassion in Adam Smith's mind,
Mm,
but it was still a mechanism as opposed to a living organism.
mm,
And this is where the reference earlier to Darwin, and I think even post-Darwin understanding of living systems gives us a whole different way of seeing how
mm,
to think about markets and as a tool that work in certain circumstances, but are in conflict in other circumstances. But your earlier point about I forget the Harvard professor, you said don't
mm.
blame the guy who put out the idea for the way that people use it. I mean,
Right, right.
the invisible hand. I was in a I had a 25th reunion of my Morgan training program a little while ago, a few years ago. And someone had a friend who had a big fancy office up on the top of a big new building in Midtown Manhattan. And the office was of a hedge fund. And the guy had a library that he was very proud of, obviously, because it was all decked out. And inside the library was this glass container with the two precious books, and one of them was the original copy of Adam Smith,
Mm,
Wealth of Nations, and the other one was Origin of the Species. And you
mm.
just know that guy is sitting there thinking survival of the fittest and invisible
I
hand
know.
and abusing both of those ideas,
Yeah, yeah.
all in a
Misusing those.
glass
Yeah,
case
yeah,
inside
yeah.
this
Mm,
library.
hmm.
So that's the way we humans do things, I guess.
Yeah,
But if we go back to kind of your current thinking, and I do want to ask you to talk a little bit about your more current work, which is more about leadership and conscious leadership as opposed to conscious organizations. And was that a sort of a reflection on how difficult it is to be a John Mackey in a world that doesn't embrace the John Mackeys? It meant in the John Mackey as a, assuming he's sort of the model of what we're looking for, or the Yvon Chouinard types, and that we need
yeah,
to develop them, or how did you make that shift?
yeah. I'm not consciously thinking of it that way in terms of John or Yvonne, but I think that there's a conscious being inside all of us trapped, that for various reasons that we have not been able to manifest and live according to that consciousness. So how do we help people be on that journey? So for me, it really started, I would say a shift started in 2018, the year I turned 60, which I don't know if you've been there yet, but it's kind of a
Yeah,
big
yeah,
verse.
yeah,
A big milestone. I mean, 40 and 50 were okay, but 60 is like, wow, really?
yeah. I'm a couple years behind you, but I'm
Okay.
hot on your trail.
So how did that happen? Like I'm not supposed to be the old guy, but
Yeah.
but that was 60 is kind of the end of the second act and the beginning of the final act, if you think about it. There's a three act life. A time to look back and a time to make sense of what you've learned, and then still have a good, hopefully, runway in front of you to be able to do things. So I was in that place, turning 60 and thinking about life, but I was writing the book called The Healing Organization at the time.
Mm.
And, in those days, I was kind of almost in a sense of panicked urgency. Like one book would finish, I was, oh my God, I don't have another book, and what am I going to do? It's like, how do I justify my existence on this planet? So I was fully into the research, and I had collected all of the case studies and all of the data, and I had earmarked that summer for writing a series of writing retreats to write that book. And then four women basically asked me the same question, including Lynn Twist that you and I were talking about earlier, right, from the Pachamama Alliance. I had interviewed her for the book for her thoughts about healing, and then she called me and said, Raj, you were in my dream last night. And the message
Oh,
I
you're in
got,
trouble now.
the message I got was that you need to come with us to the Amazon. I got a message from the shamans, okay, in Ecuador, from the Achuar and Zapara people that you need to come to the Amazon on this trip in August. You will learn more about healing in 10 days than you will learn in years and years of research. So she almost ordered me, and I said, okay, and then I had a coach for the first time, and then my co-author Nilima, they all essentially said the same thing. You're writing a book about healing. What about your own healing? And I said, well, I have a book deadline. I don't have time for that. You know, and they said, no, you need to make time for that. So I delayed my book deadline from October to February of the following year. And I said yes to all of these opportunities. I opened up 5 months in my calendar. I went to the Himalayas with a Shakti spiritual tour that Nilima organizes on the border of India and Tibet, where there's deep Buddhist wisdom there.
Mm,
I went to a silent retreat in upstate New York with Peter Senge and David Cooper-Ryder and a bunch of other people at a place called Peace Village. And in those 4 days of silence, I received so many downloads, including the outline for the book that's coming out in January now, which I'll talk about in a minute. I
mm,
worked with a coach for the first time, and she kind of reframed my whole life journey, and what it had been all about, and made me see it in a different way. And basically, I
wow.
had a difficult relationship with my father, that I come from this warrior caste and hyper masculine patriarchal system, et cetera, et cetera. There was always a tug of war inside me, but I'm much more like my mother. And my work for the first 20 years was very much in the traditional vein, trying to fit into that, and then following my heart and doing that. And she said, do you realize that you spent 40 years of your life trying to impress your father? And now you've spent the last 15 years, 45 years impressing your father. Now the last 15, honoring your mother with your work.
mm.
And what you're doing is bringing
Beautiful.
mother's energy into this. I said, wow, that I didn't think of it that way. And then she made me call my mother and tell her that. I said, we don't talk like that in my family. We talk about weather and how are your knees doing, you know. Uh, so anyway, all of these were transformational things, and going to the Amazon rainforest. And by the way, also I had some plant journey experiences. I had the ayahuasca in
Mm,
Ecuador, and I had something else, and it kind of made sense of all my life, etc., etc. You know, so that was the beginning of me turning inward and trying to understand. But I recognized, that I had found my purpose in conscious capitalism way back when I was writing Forms of Endearment, right? 2006 or
yeah.
so. I remember being in the Poconos writing some of those stories, and I was literally in tears as I'm writing these stories. And I said to my co-author, Dave, I said, David, I've never experienced tears of joy connected to my work. I've experienced anger and disappointment and frustration, but my body is telling me something. I had not cried for 20 years, and suddenly I'm crying about some stories about a company and the deep humanity that can exist inside a for-profit public company. And I said, I want to know I now know what I want to do for the rest of my life. This is the story I want to be part of because this resonated with me at a deep level.
Mm,
This was connected to my soul. This was my soul expression, right? This is because I am, as I said, much more like my mother. So I found my purpose, and from that point on, everything I've done is connected to that purpose of bringing heart, healing, soul, courage, and love, to business and leadership, so we can build a better world for all, right? But I had not, I had achieved, realized my purpose, but inner peace was missing. I wasn't happy overall in my life. And I had a lot of wounds and traumas inside me that I did not acknowledge and then let alone try to heal. And so that was the beginning of that next stage of my journey,
mm,
discovery of or getting to inner peace and healing. So I wrote a book called Awaken that came out in 23. That is kind of my journey memoir, right? Awaken,
mm,
the path to purpose, inner peace and healing. My own journey. For the first time I wrote about myself. I had never written about myself in any of my books. And then the 7 steps that came to me in that silent retreat. That's my next book. And that's really about, it's called Healing Leaders, 7 steps to recovery of self. And healing leaders having two meanings. It's about healing the leader. All of us need healing. We all carry wounds. We all have some degree of post-traumatic stress injury, whether we have PTSD or not, but we do have PTSI.
mm,
But most of us never acknowledge it. So 7 steps to recovery of self. How do you connect to your true self and manifest that in the world? And so those
mm,
7 steps are know yourself. You have to know who you are. For 45 years, I tried to impress my father and tried to be like him because he told me everything that came naturally to me, my trusting nature, my idealism, my sensitivity, my gentleness, etc., not fighting. He told me you must be rough and tough and you shouldn't trust anybody and you cannot be idealistic. You must be pragmatic and, you have to be the opposite
mm,
of who you are, and that's
mm,
no formula for happiness or well-being, right? So I knowing myself, like I am, what is my nature? Who am I? What was I born as before the world took a
mm,
hold of me, right? Knowing who you are and then loving yourself. Know yourself, then love yourself. And
mm,
that's a big leap for many of us. Bruce
mhm,
Lipton says 80 to 90% of people do not love themselves, you know. And if you don't love yourself, then you cannot receive the love of another because you just think that they are deluded. They don't know you. That's why they think they love you. But when they know you, they won't love
mhm,
you. And Francis Meehan said men are at war with each other because every man is at war with himself. So all of this inner, tremendous amount of self-loathing. And that's really behind all the dictators and the autocrats. And, there's a wounded child in there, right? Somewhere.
mm,
Know yourself, love yourself, be yourself. How do you manifest that into the world? You're the only authentic you out of the 117 billion humans that have ever lived. Every one of us is different,
mm,
right? And how do you live into that while you're evolving yourself? Once you love yourself, you can evolve yourself as well, right? But you have to start by loving yourself. So being yourself, right? Resting comfortably in your presence, and then choosing yourself, which is all the things that happen in our life, we often end up in a victim mindset to say, oh my God, why was I born to that family, to that father? Why did these terrible things happen to me? Well, the fact is, they're all gifts if you look at them rightly. I mean, you can learn from all of them, right? Every one of them
mm,
is there to teach you something. And this came to me in that silent retreat as they were serving us food. We were in silence. So you're not allowed to communicate and say, I want this, but not that. They just plop a bunch of stuff in your plate, right? And the thought came to me that this is a good metaphor for life because, life is not a buffet and there's no menu that you can order off of. So I'll have this kind of father and that kind of mother. I'll be born into this religion in this country at this time in history in this social
Beautiful.
status.
Yeah,
Right?
that's
You're
so
given a
true.
tray full of stuff, right?
Yeah,
Some of it is looks unappetizing and some of it tastes bitter, but you need all of
yeah,
it. It's your curriculum, right? You need to,
yeah.
that's what you need to go through in order to become who you're meant to
What you
be.
do with your stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and do what you're supposed to do, right? It's all there for your use. And then express yourself, finding your purpose, like going through your hero's journey, right? Choosing growth over safety, and then complete yourself, which is becoming whole, because we are
Mm,
fragmented within ourselves, masculine, feminine, but also the elder and the child energy within us is all fragmented. So we move towards becoming what we call the wise fool of tough love, the wisdom of the elder, your own higher self, your divine self, the playfulness of the inner child, the healthy child, right? The joy, the creativity, all of that comes from that child energy. And then the toughness, of the father and the love of the mother. All that can be within each of us. We can each be a wise fool of tough love. But many of us are underdeveloped in two or three of those areas. So we just show up with
mm,
one of them, right? Only toughness,
mm,
or only, love. But so
mm.
strength without love is tyranny, and love without strength is ineffective. We need both, right? And we need the wisdom and we need the playfulness. And then the last one is heal yourself, which is healing your body, but more importantly, healing your wounds and traumas. You have to talk about, I had trauma with my father, I had trauma in my family history with my father's family. And I had ancestral trauma coming from this warrior class and this tremendous trauma in my lineage, all of which shows up through epigenetics, today. And until we
Mm,
acknowledge that and then start to work on healing it, we end up becoming a bundle of reactions. We don't even know why we do what we do and say what we say because there's trauma inside us. There's amygdala hijacks, all the time. And so, as we say, we have to reveal it and feel it in order to heal it, to talk.
mm,
So I've written about all my traumas. And then
mm.
I've talked about what I've tried to do in order to heal them, right? Gabor Mate's work has been very influential on.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I've discovered him in the last couple of years.
yeah, he's wonderful.
Yeah,
So healing yourself, right, is huge. Because once you, and then when you go through all of these, then as a leader, you can then show up as a
right,
whole, loving,
right.
purposeful, healed human being, and you can spread that healing in the world through your leadership and through your organization as well.
Whatever you're leading, whether it's a company or a
Yeah.
government agency or your family or
Mhm.
it's interesting. Two of my three kids have um, entered into therapy voluntarily,
Mm.
not because there's some crisis, but like I think the next generation just somehow intuits that doing this healing work early is wise. Um,
Yeah.
so this your awakening is essentially a memoir then of your
Yeah.
pain and
Yeah.
healing. So I haven't read that yet.
Awaken is a member. That's right. Yeah. And then the next one is healing leaders, which also now I'm not shy about using my own life experiences, to write about.
Yeah, because it's not about you. You're
Yeah. 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 And I used to, my co-author said that which is deeply personal is also completely universal.
yeah.
We think
Have you
everyone.
shared awakening with your business school elder wisdom person?
Oh, he has passed away, unfortunately. My
Dear.
professor, yeah, he has passed away, but yeah, I
Because
would
he
have.
probably tell you this is all 4,000 years old too.
Well, yeah, all stories are universal, but yeah, so we can learn from each other. That's the great thing about being human, right? We can learn from other people's experience,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The only species that can do that, right? So we don't
Well,
have.
Raj, this is beautiful. I really appreciate your sharing all of this. We didn't have time to get into this during our little lunch a few months ago, but nothing, I'm not shocked at all that this is what's underneath, and it's really an inspiration to hear you sharing it, and to me, very, it's just sort of a hopeful. Um, I'm left feeling hopeful about the chaos outside my window, because um, there is a pathway out of this, and we are sort of trapped in a double bind of our own making through our own ignorance and blindness. And anyway, it's a beautiful story. So why don't we invite folks on the call, and I'm sure everyone has lots of thoughts and reflections to share, or questions for Raj. Um,
I do see some old friends in the group. Wonderful to see you all.
I've got to
Yeah,
shift my
if you have a
views.
question, feel free to raise your hand via
Yeah,
the
we're a
actual
big group,
raise
so
hand.
we'll start. Nelson, if we see your hand, but we don't see your face.
I didn't. You see me? Well, can you
Uh,
hear me?
we hear you, so go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Great, great insight, Raj. Thank you very much. I just want to share this quote. Everything that you said today reminds me of this quote by Buckminster Fuller, which gives me a lot of hope. Which he says, "Humanity is now experiencing history's most difficult evolutionary transformation." And that seems to keep with the three elements of the movies that you share with us. And so it seems like what you're saying, this conscious capitalism, is part of that evolutionary step that we're taking. That's why I think there is a lot of hope, because we're actually going through a period of transformation. Painful, yes, obviously, and absolutely painful, but um, again, a transformation. And just one more thing. One of our colleagues here on the chat, or on the call, mentioned the uh, 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 cooperatives. How do you see cooperatives being part of this conscious evolution or conscious capitalism?
Yeah,
Thank
well,
you.
thank you. I think in terms of the transformation that we're going through, you're very right, and it's never pain-free to transform. I like the phrase that our friend Chip Conley uses. It's not a crisis, it's a chrysalis. So
Mhm.
the caterpillar becomes a butterfly, you go through that chrysalis phase, right? You have to die to your old self in order to emerge into this new self, where you spread light and beauty, right, in the world as a butterfly. So I think it's a
Mhm.
chrysalis stage that we're going through. So there will be pain, but there's great beauty and hope on the other side of that. I
Mhm.
think the cooperative movement is great. I was just in Brazil a month or so ago at the meeting of the National Cooperative Alliance, and hundreds of companies were there, and they're doing beautiful work. I think that movement taps into that other side of human beings. Capitalism only taps into the competition, the competitive drive. That I think if harnessed carefully, it can be productive. It is, but it can also become quite destructive, right? That my win is at your loss. That somebody has to lose in order for me to win. I don't think that's true. We say we can do business in a way that everybody matters and everybody wins. It's not about one winner and many losers, right? So the cooperative movement, I think, taps into that energy in a good way, and it's a natural, alliance with conscious capitalism. I do think we need a healthy blend. It's always, it's polarities, right? Competition and cooperation are polarities. And when you go
Mhm.
too far on one side and only look at that, and you sort of discount the other side, then you end up getting the negatives of that. So you need some degree of healthy competition inside the cooperative mindset, just like you need a cooperative way of being inside a competitive mindset. So we need both of those. But certainly, I think we are overweighted on the competition side currently, and not enough cooperation.
Thank you,
It's,
Raj. Thank you very much.
thanks, Nelson. And just as a reminder, Bucky wrote what he wrote in the 1980s or earlier.
Yeah,
So
right.
uh,
Yeah.
let me bring a feminine energy voice in. Roshni, why don't you join us with your
Hi,
thoughts?
John and Raj. Thank you so much again for your time. Super insightful conversation. I was wondering, Raj, what do you think will be the trajectory of these large corporations? What will it take for them to change? How will they integrate the feminine energy if right now capitalism is swayed to one side? Thank you.
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's you know, who was it who wrote that book? Who said you cannot get somebody to believe something if their salary depends.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
you cannot get somebody to believe some. Oh, I'm getting an echo. I'm not sure what's
Yeah.
happening. Uh, anyway, when people's self-interest is tied into an existing way of thinking,
Hmm.
If you could all mute your mics, I think that would be helpful, perhaps. So yeah, I think it's a little disconcerting. Is anybody else getting that
No,
echo?
Yeah, we're
No?
hearing it. Yeah.
no, fine.
It's just
I'm
me?
hearing it.
Ah,
Yeah.
No, I'm
okay.
hearing it too.
Okay. So, I think what we have currently in our system is people who have risen through the ranks and become leaders because they've been very adept, very successful at within the existing paradigm, right, of delivering shareholder value and the numbers and so forth. And so they've risen through that system, and our system selects for those people who can achieve the results regardless of how they get them, right? So you had Jack Welch as kind of the prototype of that
Mm.
kind of leader, and he became kind of the demigod for other aspiring leaders. And his people who reported to him all went on to run, and I would say ruin many other companies like Boeing, and Allied Signal and Honeywell and many 3M and so forth, were all run by Jack Welch proteges. So we had a system that selected for and developed and bred people who are in a way ruthless, and you could even say single-minded to the point of sociopathic. Okay, and there's interesting research that says the profession with the highest incidence of sociopaths is CEOs. Okay,
And
number two,
finance.
sorry,
And finance.
and finance, I'm sure. Number two is surgeons, actually. Turns out surgeons, for some reason, are kind of sociopathic. I don't know why.
Hmm.
But it basically says that you focus on achieving the numbers because the company's numbers are tied into your own bank account, right? Your own well-being, and doesn't matter how you do it, how many people you have to let go or whatever you have to do, right? So I think we've got a system in which people have come up through those ranks, and now those are the people who are the incumbents in boards as well as in leadership.
Yeah.
And I think until we have almost a generational change, that over time we start to get new leaders, younger leaders, more balanced, feminine women as well. That in many cases that's a hard thing because when you have a leader who thinks in a certain way, it's very hard to change the company. And when you have a board full of people who simply support that mindset, and they're the ones who pick the leaders. So those are kind of the obstacles to change, even though we can show with very credible research that when you operate this way as a business, you will generate more shareholder value over time. Okay. Firms of endearment, it was 9-1 over 10 years. There are other research, Built to Last also has massive results like that. Other companies, other research as well. But it's hard for people to break that paradigm of thinking that unless you focus on profit maximization, you will not achieve profits. Actually, if you focus on your purpose and your values, and you run your company well, you will generate much more value for everybody, including shareholders. But people they're trapped inside a paradigm that they have been taught. Business, they almost think of as a zero-sum game, right? That if I pay my employees too much, then shareholders are going to suffer. Well, Costco has been doing that for decades, right? And Jim Sinegal gets criticized by Wall Street to say, why are you paying your people double of Walmart? You are stealing from the shareholders. That money belongs to the shareholders. We know you can hire people for $10. Why are you paying them $25? And he said, well, I believe my people should be able to lead a decent life and look after their children. And if you don't believe that, then you should not buy my stock. You should not recommend it. And he said, by the way, we pay our people double, but our sales per employee are 3 times higher. And by the way, our annual employee turnover is 7% and Walmart is 70%. Walmart has to hire 2 million people to replace those who leave voluntarily. People join us and never leave. So we save enormously in other ways. We don't waste money on turnover and all those kinds of things. And we allow people to lead a decent life. And we have some of the lowest prices and the highest shareholder value, in the entire retail sector. So there's a way of being here which people don't quite understand. They have still the zero-sum mindset.
Yeah. A
You must
mechanistic mindset. They're not seeing
Yeah,
holistic.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So
Let me
this
bring in a
requires,
couple more voices, Raj.
sure, sure.
Jim Stoner, good to see you.
First of all, thanks so much for a fantastically good presentation. And I love your Star Wars metaphor.
Yeah.
Quick question. I look at the Ted Lasso series through the lens of love.
Mhm.
Came up for me as I kept listening to you. Do you have any comments on that?
Oh, we love Ted Lasso. We've seen it twice. I think it's such a great series, and it has so much wisdom about leadership and what it takes. It reminds me of the quote that I like to use now from Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia, who's also the pastor at the Arizona Baptist Church, where Martin Luther King used to be the pastor. And he said, you cannot lead the people unless you love the people.
Mm.
And you cannot love the people unless you know the people. And you cannot know the people unless you walk among the people. And how many leaders can we say that about? How many leaders actually know the people they lead? How many of them know what life is like for the people at that entry level in their organization, where they live and how far they have to drive and how they pay their bills and how they, how they just survive? If we could see a thought bubble over the head of everybody in our organization, it would break your heart what people are dealing with on a daily basis, the burdens that they are struggling under, right? How close they are to financial ruin, how much it breaks their heart when they cannot do what they need to do for their children. So true leaders care about the people they lead. They don't just use them to achieve their own goals. That's a tyrant. A tyrant uses people to fill their own ego-based needs.
It's so resonance. I just listened to a podcast with the CEO of Google,
Mm,
and he used the expression. It just hit me. He said, I can get more out of my people. It was what he said, and this was after he commented about growing up with his grandfather, who was encouraged him to be a reader. And then he
mm.
listed one book. The only book he mentioned in the podcast was Ayn Rand. That was the only
Oh,
book he could think of.
oh,
And this
no,
guy is now running Google.
you're talking about Sundar Pichai?
Yeah.
No, I didn't know. I didn't know. I know a lot
Lex,
more about Satya Nadella, but I don't know much about Sundar. But okay,
yeah,
that's unfortunate.
Lex Friedman podcast. It's quite illuminating and terrifying.
Okay, please send me that link or have it.
Tristan, we're going to run out of time, so will be quick questions and quick responses, and see if we can
Yeah,
get a bunch more in.
I'm very curious about the concept of consciousness. Like, I know about the problems that capitalism has, but I had never heard about the solutions to it. And so I wonder, like, how do you spread this concept? Because I think it's really easy to understand, but then to interiorize within like your way of acting and like behaving in the world. And does maybe education have a part to play in this?
Yeah, I think education has a big part to play in it. But we're not doing any of that right now in our high schools or in our universities for the most part. We're just training people, for certain kinds of work. But we're really not teaching them how to live and how to find purpose and meaning and so forth. So I think education certainly is a big part of it. What we do in our movement is, we have chapters in about 25 US cities and 20 countries. We try to bring people together and, we have books and we have podcasts and all of the usual things, right? To try to reach people. And then many, many fellow travelers out there, many movements that are parallel to ours. And as I said, Sadhguru, which is the Isha Foundation in India, they have 17 million volunteers and something like 5 billion views on YouTube last year. So there's a huge impact that
Mm.
they're also aligned. They're awakening consciousness, right? Um, and so I think all of these we need to channel all of these things.
Islands of coherence.
Yeah, yeah.
Scott.
Thank you. It seems to me everything you're talking about is rooted in a deep sense of humanity, and which to me begs the question with AI therapists and AI artists, and I think maybe not too far in the future, AI's leading companies. How does AI fit into being able to accomplish what you're talking about when it is not human?
Yeah, well, that's the big question of our times.
I knew AI would get here sooner or later.
So John and I are working on the second edition of Conscious Capitalism right now, and of course we have a chapter on AI that we're working on. To me, if I think about, AI is a tool, right? And perhaps the most powerful tool ever invented by humans. But what happens with any tool depends on the consciousness of its user. So a profit-centric shareholder value sort of ruthless business can use AI to just intensify that way of being, right? And cut costs and reduce jobs and maximize
Figure out what to
efficiency.
charge you when you're looking for a taxi at 11 o'clock
Optimize
at
the
night on a
price
train.
and price gouge you at, whatever it is, right? Optimize for that. Or we can actually use AI in a way to deepen our consciousness, to find a purpose that is more resonant, to make that purpose come alive for every employee and every customer and every investor. That we can think about each of our stakeholders and understand them at a deep level, at an individual level, not just as a collective, and create meaning and well-being and value for all of them, etc. We can, as leaders, use AI as a coach, as a mentor, etc., to make better decisions, to deepen our own self-awareness, our own consciousness, our own practice, and we can use it to enrich our culture and make it a culture which is rooted in more of these human elements of trust and caring and authenticity and so forth. So it's really how do we deploy AI in service of what? So again, you think about capitalism is probably one of the most powerful ideas human beings have ever had. But how do you organize society? It has transformed the face of this planet. And AI is one of the most powerful technologies humans have ever developed. And each of these can be used with low consciousness. And so that can make a lot of money for some people and destroy the planet, capitalism, as in many ways it is doing. And likewise, AI can be used to build bombs and to create fake everything. Or with higher consciousness, each of them can become profoundly, positively impactful in the
Mm.
world, right? And so again, it always goes back to consciousness, right? If the consciousness with which we do anything matters for everything.
Which, Raj, is why I see consciousness, and I've learned this from people far wiser than me, as as fundamental. It's the foundation layer,
Mhm.
and AI, humanity, the mountains, our machines, they all manifest out of consciousness, and so it is the fundamental layer. Two recommendations on this question about AI that I'd recommend. One is there's a book called Irreducible by
Mhm.
Federico Fagan, who's
Mhm.
literally the man who invented the microprocessor.
Mhm.
And he makes a very strong case that AI is a machine, it is a tool, it will never have consciousness. And it's above my pay grade to assess whether he's right or wrong, but it certainly resonates with me very strongly and is consistent with what Raj just said. And the second is, there's an active dialogue around this question about AI within our regenerative education community. There's a regenerative technology project that two of our alums started that you can Google and find regenerative technology project, and it addresses technology more broadly. And then there's a new paper out called Regenerative AI. I can't remember the link, but if I think if you Google regenerative AI ethics, you'll find it. And maybe I'll hunt for it while we're waiting. But to me, this is like suddenly the most fascinating critical question facing us that we're all wrestling with and trying to grapple with. So,
Mm.
um,
I
Tay,
think I'm
I know you have some announcements, so I should probably, unfortunately, hello, Carmen and Emily, nice to see you again, and everyone else, but I should probably uh, push us off and let Raj get back to work as we promised we'd let him after 90 minutes. So,
And I'll drop a link in the chat where we can continue this dialogue. So, Carmen and Amanda and Ashish, I welcome you to share your questions there.
Tay, do you have announcements or should I? I thought you had announcements at the end, no?
Just a reminder for, folks who want to continue into these types of dialogues. We have a really exciting lineup of thought leaders joining us in the upcoming cohort of the Introduction to Regenerative Economics course that starts on September 5th. Lynn Twist will be joining us, who Raj and John were speaking to. And John, anything you want to share about that and to participate in our current giveaway, which is really an opportunity for folks to be part of this course and, deepen into your understanding of regenerative economics and where it fits into our world right now, in a really accessible way. That's really the purpose of our generosity fund.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said, and I guess I mostly just want to thank Raj for sharing both his time and his wisdom with us. Oh, there you are. I thought I'd lost you. You're still on my screen. It was really just a wonderful conversation, and I'm really excited to continue to explore this intersection of the shared view about consciousness and then the application to, business and organizations and leadership, but also at the system layer. And I just think that this is such a rich area to explore. I think we're probably still in the first or second inning, to use a baseball metaphor, in terms of really grasping what the possibilities and the potential are. And I do think that the environmental, both the political chaos, the divisiveness, and the ecological constraints that are coming in on us now make this moment the moment that we will break through the chrysalis into something profoundly different, or it's possible we'll collapse down into something much less evolved and have to, in a sense, start over and try again. And so I just think it's a profoundly important time to be involved. It's a big burden for young people to have to wrestle with this, but I think they're frankly adjusting to it, from my experience, easier than many of us older folks who are trapped in our old ways of thinking. And I can only encourage people to check out the Conscious Capitalism movement. Lots of shared worldviews there, and check out all of the other communities that are wrestling with the future of capitalism, the B Corp movement. And obviously, I'm passionate about this idea of regeneration and regenerative leadership and regenerative systems as the foundation. So I think we're in, whoever asked about education, I think this is sort of like the educational challenge of at least the last several centuries. It's like a new enlightenment needs to be born with a new understanding of reality, and so that's why I'm so passionate about education myself. And the meeting that Raj and I were at recently was around trying to reinvent business school education, and I personally think that what was that thing you said, Raj, that I also loved, that the business academics are what was that
Yeah,
you said?
well, we're not thought leaders so much as practice followers.
Practice followers, yeah. And
And
the thought leadership is going to happen. I mean, certainly there are thought leaders in the academy, but the thought leadership is going to happen in these islands of coherence that are sitting outside the formal institutions, whether they're cool creative businesses or whether they're networks like Raj has created, or emerging education ecosystems like the With Life community we're creating. I think that's where the real energy is, and it's certainly what draws me and my interests. So, at any rate, enough of me blabbing along. It's great to have you all with us, and Raj, really a special thanks for connecting into our community, and I'll look forward to lots more of that in the future.
yes, it was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, and I really appreciated the interaction, all the comments. I did put a couple of links there, Conscious Capitalism, if you want to learn more about that movement. We have our annual conference coming up in Cincinnati in September. That could be fun for some people. I also put a link to my the Conscious Enterprise Center in Mexico, where I'm a professor now at Technological de Monterrey. So we are working very hard on changing business education. We have 200 professors now teaching this stuff, and working with many other universities as well. So we're all
Very
doing.
cool. Fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you, Raj. Thank you all.